And joining me today is Michael, who's a PhD student at UC Berkeley, right? Working with Professor Kenji Soga. Long title, basically, our project was coming up with a loss assessment study for Port of LA, Los Angeles region. And during, going to that or reaching to that objective, we had to come up with a workflow. So I'm going to be basically touching on some of the details of the workflow, and then showing some of the results we've been able to get so far. I'll skip this bit on the resilience and why it's important to focus on network level studies for transportation networks, and jump to the objective. So as I mentioned, one of the goals of the study was to come up with a workflow that sort of gets us from a hypothetical earthquake to loss results in terms of maybe economic or network level consequences. And the focus was the Port of Los Angeles, the transportation network around it, mainly because it's the biggest port in the United States, and it actually it makes up most of the container traffic coming in and out of the US. Not going to spend a lot of time on the framework. The previous presentation by Dr. Baker, the idea is pretty much the same. I'm going to mainly be focusing on some of the unique ingredients of this framework, and one of them would be getting bridge models, bridge-specific models using an image-based methodology, and coupling it with a transportation network model that can get some preliminary or rough loss results in terms of economic effects. So I'll skip this part. I think everyone in this room is pretty familiar with this portion. The part that I wanted to sort of touch on is for this case study, we selected a magnitude 7.3 earthquake that's about 2 miles off the coast of Port of Los Angeles, and our damage realizations were basically calculated based on this the spectral accelerations induced by this earthquake. One of the unique ingredients of the study was instead of using archetype fragility curves, we went ahead and modeled pretty much all the bridges around the Port of Los Angeles, basically bridge-specific fragility curves for all of the bridges around the port, using an image-based methodology. What it is, it could be a fairly lengthy discussion in itself, but in short, using a collection of images, street-level imagery of bridges, we were able to connect the center line geometry of the bridges with there's a transverse steel reinforcement ratio specified based on the year of construction of a bridge, and this information it will be pretty difficult to get from images, but National Bridge Inventory, a generalized catalog of bridges, provides this information. So based on combining that information with the bridge geometry, we were able to populate, for instance, the transverse steel reinforcement. And there's more to it too. That was just one example. There's a lot of these tables for longitudinal reinforcement, some of the other abutment details, and so forth. Once the class statistics are coupled with the image-based geometric model of the bridge, you're able to drive fragility curves, bridge specific. But to predict the downtime, what we used was some of the capacity functions provided in ATC. Some of them are outdated, but provides a mean to sort of couple the damage probabilities with expected downtime. And the way we define damage, we use the methodology introduced by Pierre, and some of the damage thresholds again came from literature. The main thing is we lump the damage to basically two main components: damage to columns and abutments, and rest of the things such as in-span hinges, we didn't really focus on damage with those aspects, but which we're able to capture with this image-based methodology. And this is just a map of all the bridges we've modeled. So the port is right around here. Get my cursor. And we modeled 1,000 bridges. So we have bridge-specific fragility for 1,000 bridges around. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mike.
Hi, everyone. So I work with Kenichi Soga, and this is like the transportation traffic part of things. So compared to, I guess, Dr. Baker's work earlier, we went the painful way and went through it with the simulations. But yeah, I'll go through like a basic overview of how we did it. So to simulate the traffic, we needed two main things. One is the network data and one is like the demand data. So for the network data, we used the road network from OpenStreetMap that comprises a SCAG region, or 6 counties listed there. And the network is consists of 600,000 intersections and 1.4 million roads. And then from Barbaros methodology, previously we were able to get how much of the roadway and the bridges were closed for 5 scenarios after the earthquake. So like 1, 3, how do I do this? 1, 3, 7, 14, 30 days after the earthquake, we were able to identify which bridges were closed. Yeah, so the first figure, that's just a network. This one, it shows the one specific to the port area, which is what we're interested in. And then this one in the red, black segments are the portions which were closed. And then for the demand data, we were able to get some OD data from SCAG. In total, it amounted to like 10.6 million trips in a day. So that's, as you can see it here. And then for the port data, there are 200,000 trips going in and out of the port, as you can see on the smaller section. And then for our methodology, so we have that road network. We have that road network and we have that travel demand, and then we have the output from the bridge models earlier, and then we were able to initialize the simulation, and then we run that for 24 hours with a semi-dynamic traffic assignment model, which basically updates the weights of the road every 15 minutes, depending on the congestion, and then allows the agents to recalibrate or reroute based on the updated congestion status of the network. So vehicles are assumed to choose fastest path, and then trucks are restricted from using residential roads. Yeah, so we ran this 10 times to make sure that the randomness from each run doesn't really influence, or that's not what we're noticing in terms of like the results that we get, and that was the case at least. And then to measure the impact, there are basically 3 components, and at least like in the traffic side that we looked into, which is a vehicle hours traveled, which could be broken down into 2 more components, like the change in the number of fulfilled trips, which signify the network connectivity, and then the change in travel time, which signified the need to reroute or detour. And this combined with the length of the damaged roads and bridges would constitute like our impact estimate, split into like the direct and the indirect cost. And then furthermore, on top of that, because of the model that we use, we're also able to get like spatial and temporal variations of the impact. And going quickly over some of our results, so this plot is for the port area specifically. We were able to notice that in terms of the number of fulfilled trips or trips that are able to complete their trip, we see a 15% maximum decrease a day after the earthquake. And then by 30 days after the earthquake, it decreases to around 4%. I think what's most interesting here is that, I'm not sure if you can see it too well, but the blue trips are those that are not able to be completed. And then the green trips are those that are not able to be completed that start or ended in the port. And at least like for our simulations, what we got was that more than 50% of the trips that are not able to be completed are like port related. And so there is sort of like a spatially disproportionate impact to the port, at least in this simulation. And then for the average travel time, it increases a maximum of 6%. But later I'll show you that compared to the impact of the unfulfilled trips, like this is a bit dwarfed. And then for the overall vehicle hours traveled, we see this initial drop the day after, but then a little bit more of a drop like 3 days after, and then it rebounds back. I think this is a bit strange initially to us, but I think how to explain this quickly is that 3 days after the earthquake, roads inside the port area like were estimated to have recovered, and so their travel times decreased in that sense and contributed to the decrease in VHT. And then only after that did more fulfilled trips complete, like because of an opening of a bridge that connects a port to the other parts of LA, which leads to that rise again. And in terms of the impact assessment, I think one thing that we found was that around like 2/3 of the cost is like direct, and then the rest is indirect. But with the indirect costs, like most of it is because of the demand that's lost, and very, very little is caused by congestion or delays. Initially, we were looking and comparing it with like SCAG GDP and how like it seems that it's less than 1% of the SCAG GDP. So it seems like the impact isn't that much. But I think like after making this presentation, or while making this presentation, I think one thing to look at is like budget of retrofit and how this compares to that. But yeah, some of the discussion points that we sort of extracted so far was that the port area impacts contribute to more than half the overall cost. So at least like spatially, there is a spatially disproportionate impact there. But it seems that overall, the impact, at least by the transportation network, is not disproportionate to the overall economic activity in the region. And so we sort of have a sense that maybe there is some good resilience of the port area in LA, at least like the transportation network there. Yeah, and I think that's all for now, and we're open to questions.
So first of all, great presentation. My question is related to the model generation. I found that to be really interesting how you were able to use imagery to be able to pull that out. To what extent is that process automated? So for example, if you'd like to repeat this analysis for another region, because Google Street images and other images are readily available, how hard would it be if it's very foreign to say apply it in another place?
I would say it's like 95%. Absolutely. So the question was, we generated bridge models using images. To what extent is that process automated? I would say about maybe 95%. I think the ones that we run into issues are full still bridges, because we don't have enough class statistics for those kinds of bridges. Being able to come up with class statistics for all regions in the US. California is well studied, not all regions are the same. And I think a couple more issues are, certain bridges that go over rivers, channels, where the availability of street view images degrade quite a bit. There is methods for that kind of stuff, but I think, I haven't had a time to sort of work out the if and else statements necessary for that kind of stuff. I would say 95%. But the first time I gave this presentation, it was maybe around 75%. So it's getting there. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't hear the.
Where did you source the damage thresholds for the columns and lines?
That again comes from literature. I don't think I have the citation for it, but a paper published in 2015, I believe. Some researcher worked with Caltrans to come up with damage thresholds typical to California bridges. So that's where they came from. All right, okay, yeah.
I have one question, if I read things right, it was kind of amazing that things recovered within 3 or 4 days after the earthquake.
Yeah.
What gets done in that time? A little bit of cleanup, inspection? I'm curious about your recovery models there.
Yeah, I think, and this I think was probably one of the aspects that requires some improvement. We're using the ATC 13 restoration curves. It's literally just 4 curves for the entire bridge inventory in the United States. I talked to some Caltrans people. What they told me is right after an earthquake, they do actually do extensive closures to make sure things are safe. But I don't think ATC curves sort of reflect that. I think it's just a coincidence there. I think maybe in terms of dependability of the results, I think a longer horizon probably is a little bit more dependable. That's just my gut feeling. This is, I think, a weakness. I think that sort of applies to a lot of the transportation network studies. The restoration curves aren't very well studied, or we don't really have ones that are dependable.
No, but I think having these models highlights those issues. Okay, thank you.